My name is Alex Chen, and I've been working as a paramedic for the city of Portland for 7 years. I've seen everything you'd expect in this job: heart attacks, overdoses, car accidents, domestic violence calls, and every kind of medical emergency imaginable. But for the past 3 months, I've been receiving 911 calls that shouldn't be possible. Calls from people who died years ago, asking for help that I can never give them. I'm documenting this because I need someone to know what's happening, and because I'm starting to think these calls aren't random. Let me start from the beginning. I work the overnight shift, 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., which is typically when the city sees its most dramatic emergencies. Friday and Saturday nights bring alcohol-related incidents, domestic disturbances, and accidents involving people making poor decisions. The rest of the week is usually quieter but unpredictable. You might go hours without a call, then suddenly respond to 3 serious emergencies back to back. I've always preferred night shifts. There's something about working when most of the city is asleep that appeals to me. The streets are quieter, the radio chatter is less chaotic, and you develop a closer relationship with your partner and the other overnight crews. Plus, the differential pay helps with my student loan payments from paramedic school. My current partner is Maria Santos, a 20-year veteran who's seen absolutely everything. She's the kind of paramedic who can start an IV while riding in the back of a moving ambulance during an earthquake, and she has this supernatural ability to remain calm in any situation. Maria has been training me on the more complex procedures and teaching me how to read the subtle signs that separate routine calls from life-threatening emergencies. Our unit, Medic 47, covers the southeast quadrant of Portland, which includes several residential neighborhoods, a portion of the industrial district, and part of downtown. It's a diverse area with everything from expensive condos to low-income housing projects, and the variety of calls reflects that demographic range. The first unusual call came on September 15th, a Tuesday night that had been relatively quiet. Maria and I had just finished restocking our supplies after a routine transport, an elderly man with chest pains who turned out to be having a panic attack rather than a heart attack. We were parked at our usual spot near Powell Boulevard, catching up on paperwork and waiting for the next call. At 3:17 a.m., our radio crackled to life. Medic 47, respond to 208-47 SE Morrison Street for a medical emergency. Caller reports difficulty breathing, female, age 34, PD is en route. I grabbed the radio. Medic 47 responding. Maria started the engine, and we headed toward Morrison Street, about 8 minutes away with light traffic. What do you know about that address? Maria asked as we drove. I checked our computer system, which tracks previous calls to specific locations. Couple of minor calls over the past few years, nothing recent or significant. When we arrived at 200 SE Morrison, we found a small, well-maintained house with a front porch light on. A police cruiser was already there, and Officer Williams met us at the front door. Strange situation, he said. Got a 911 call from a woman saying she couldn't breathe. Gave this address. But when I arrived, the house is dark and nobody's answering the door. Neighbors say an elderly couple lives here, but they're currently visiting family in California. Maria and I exchanged glances. False calls aren't uncommon. Sometimes people give wrong addresses during emergencies, or they're confused about their location. But something about this felt different. Did you get a name from the caller? I asked. Officer Williams checked his notes. Dispatch said the caller identified herself as Jennifer Morrison. But here's the weird part. I called the homeowners to verify, and they told me their daughter Jennifer died 3 years ago in a car accident. A chill ran down my spine. They're sure the house is empty? Positive. I've walked the perimeter, checked all the windows and doors, no signs of forced entry, no lights on inside, no indication anyone's been here recently. We stood there for a moment, trying to make sense of the situation. In 7 years of paramedic work, I'd never encountered anything like this. Could have been a prank call, Maria suggested. Someone using the daughter's name to mess with the family. Officer Williams nodded. That's what I'm thinking. Dispatch is going to flag this address and see if we get any more calls. We cleared the scene and returned to service, but I couldn't stop thinking about the call. Something about the whole situation felt wrong, though I couldn't articulate why. 3 nights later, September 18th, we received another unusual call. Medic 47, respond to 4521 SE Hawthorne Boulevard for a cardiac arrest. Male, age 67, CPR in progress. Cardiac arrest calls are high-priority emergencies that require an immediate response. Maria hit the lights and sirens, and we raced toward Hawthorne Boulevard. The address was for a small apartment building in a mixed commercial and residential area. When we arrived, fire department paramedics were already on scene, but they met us outside with confused expressions. "We can't find the patient," Fire Captain Rodriguez explained. "Got here about 3 minutes after the call came in. Building manager let us into apartment 4B, which is where the call originated, but it's been vacant for 6 months. No signs anyone's been inside recently." "What about the 911 call?" I asked. Caller said his name was Robert Kim, said he was having chest pains and thought he was having a heart attack, gave the apartment number and everything. But according to the building manager, Robert Kim was the previous tenant who died in that apartment 6 months ago. Massive heart attack. Maria and I looked at each other. 2 calls in 3 days, both from people who were supposed to be dead. "This is getting weird," Maria muttered as we packed up our equipment. Captain Rodriguez overheard her. "You guys had something similar recently." I told him about the Morrison Street call, and his expression grew serious. "That's concerning. I've been doing this for 15 years, and I've never seen anything like phantom 911 calls from deceased people." We filed our reports and cleared the scene, but I was deeply unsettled. One strange call could be explained as a prank or a mistake. 2 calls started to suggest a pattern. Over the next week, I did some research during my downtime. I looked up the records for both calls, trying to understand what had happened to Jennifer Morrison and Robert Kim. Jennifer Morrison had been 34 years old when she died in a single car accident on I-84 during a rainstorm. According to the police report, she'd been driving home from her job as a nurse at Legacy Emanuel Hospital when she lost control of her car and hit a guardrail. She was pronounced dead at the scene from injuries sustained in the crash. The accident had occurred at 3:23 a.m. on a Tuesday morning in June, 3 years ago. She'd been working the overnight shift at the hospital and was driving home when the accident happened. Robert Kim had been 67 when he suffered a fatal heart attack in his apartment. The building manager found him 3 days later when neighbors complained about a smell. The coroner estimated he'd died around 3:30 a.m. on a Wednesday morning in March, 6 months ago. Both deaths had occurred during the early morning hours, around the same time that we'd received the 911 calls. That couldn't be a coincidence. I shared my findings with Maria during our next shift, and she listened thoughtfully. "So you think we're getting 911 calls from ghosts?" she asked. "I don't know what I think, but 2 people call 911 for help, both at 3 a.m., both giving addresses where they died, both identifying themselves with names of deceased people. That's not a coincidence." Maria had been a paramedic long enough to have seen some unexplainable things. "I've heard stories from other crews about weird calls, but nothing like this. Usually it's just a feeling that something's off, or equipment acting strange at certain locations. Have you ever heard of anything like this happening in other cities?" "Not specifically, but there are always urban legends in this job. Stories about ambulances being flagged down by people who turn out to be long-dead accident victims, or receiving calls from hospitals that closed decades ago." That night, September 25th, we received our 3rd supernatural call. Medic 47, respond to the Burnside Bridge for a jumper in the water. Caller reports seeing someone jump from the east side of the bridge. Water rescue is en route. Jumper calls are always intense. The Burnside Bridge is unfortunately a common location for suicide attempts, and the Willamette River's strong currents make water rescues extremely dangerous. We responded with lights and sirens, meeting fire department water rescue teams at the bridge. The Coast Guard was also responding with a boat to search the river. But after 30 minutes of searching, no one could find any evidence that someone had jumped. No witnesses besides the anonymous 911 caller, no personal belongings left on the bridge, no body in the water. "Dispatch, what information do you have on the original caller?" Maria radioed. Caller identified himself as David Park, said he witnessed someone jump from the east walkway of the bridge. Call came from a cell phone, but when we tried to call back for more details, the number was disconnected. I felt that familiar chill again. "Can you run the name David Park against any previous incidents at this location?" There was a pause while the dispatcher searched the system. Medic 47, "We have a David Park who jumped from the Burnside Bridge 2 years ago. Body was recovered 3 days later." The pattern was becoming undeniable. We were receiving 911 calls from people who had died, reporting the circumstances of their own deaths. Over the next several weeks, the calls continued with increasing frequency. Every few nights we'd receive a call from someone who turned out to be deceased, always reporting an emergency that matched the circumstances of their death. September 30th, call from Lisa Chen, no relation to me, reporting a house fire at her address. Lisa had died in a house fire at that location 4 years ago. October 3rd, call from Michael Torres, reporting a motorcycle accident on S.E. Powell Boulevard. Michael had died in a motorcycle accident at that exact intersection 8 months ago. October 7th, call from Sarah Williams, reporting a drug overdose at a downtown apartment. Sarah had died of a heroin overdose at that address 1 year ago. October 12th, call from James Peterson, reporting chest pains at a construction site. James had suffered a fatal heart attack at that work site 5 months ago. Each call followed the same pattern. Received around 3 a.m., caller identified themselves with the name of someone who had died at that location. Emergency described matched the circumstances of their death. When we arrived, we'd find no patient and no evidence that anyone had called for help. I started keeping a detailed log of these calls, documenting the names, addresses, circumstances, and death records I could find. The file grew thicker each week. Maria and I weren't the only crew experiencing this phenomenon. I started discreetly asking other paramedics if they'd received any unusual calls, and I discovered that several other units had similar experiences. Medic 23 had received calls from 3 different deceased people over the past month. Medic 31 reported 2 phantom calls from people who had died in their coverage area. Medic 42 had received 4 calls from deceased individuals. But here's what was strange. It was only happening to overnight crews, and only during the 3 a.m. hour. Day shift and evening shift crews weren't reporting any unusual calls. I brought my findings to our supervisor, Captain Lisa Rodriguez, during a quiet moment in early October. Captain, I need to discuss something unusual that's been happening on the overnight shift. She looked up from her paperwork. What kind of unusual? I showed her my log of phantom calls and explained the pattern we'd discovered. She listened without interrupting, her expression growing more serious as I presented the evidence. You're telling me you think dead people are calling 911? I'm telling you we're receiving calls from people who match the names and circumstances of individuals who died at the addresses we're being sent to. I don't know how it's happening, but the pattern is too consistent to be coincidental. Captain Rodriguez studied my documentation. This is comprehensive. You've really researched each of these cases. Yes, ma'am. And I've confirmed with other overnight crews that they're experiencing similar calls. She was quiet for a long moment. Alex, this is either an elaborate hoax involving multiple people, or it's something that falls way outside normal operational parameters. Either way, I need to escalate this. Captain Rodriguez contacted the 911 dispatch center and arranged a meeting with their supervisor to discuss the unusual call patterns. She also reached out to other EMS agencies in the region to see if they'd experienced similar phenomena. What we learned was disturbing. Portland wasn't the only city experiencing phantom calls from deceased individuals. Seattle EMS had documented 12 similar cases over the past 6 months. Vancouver's paramedic service had recorded 8 cases. Eugene had 5 documented phantom calls. All followed the same pattern, overnight calls around 3 a.m. from people who had died at the addresses they were calling from, describing emergencies that matched their cause of death. The 911 dispatch supervisor, Margaret Wong, had been working emergency communications for 25 years. She'd never seen anything like this. The calls are coming through our normal 911 system, she explained during our meeting. They show up in our computer system, just like any other emergency call. The phone numbers appear to be valid cell phone numbers, but when we try to call them back, they're disconnected or the numbers don't exist. Is there any way to trace where the calls are actually originating? Captain Rodriguez asked. We've tried. The cell phone tower data shows the calls coming from the general vicinity of the addresses being reported, which is normal, but the specific phone numbers don't match any active accounts in the cellular network. Margaret showed us recordings of several phantom calls. The voices sounded completely normal, distressed people calling for help, providing clear information about their emergencies. Nothing about the calls themselves suggested anything supernatural, but when played back to back, there was something eerie about hearing dead people's voices asking for help they would never receive. What's really strange, Margaret continued, is that these calls started appearing in our system about 3 months ago, right around the time you first reported the Morrison Street call. Before that, we have no record of any similar incidents. So something changed in September, I said. Something that started causing deceased people to call 911. That's the working theory, but we have no idea what could have triggered this phenomenon. The meeting concluded with an agreement to continue documenting these calls and to try to identify any patterns that might explain what was happening. Captain Rodriguez assigned me to be the point person for tracking phantom calls, working with dispatch to investigate each incident. Over the next few weeks, I developed a routine for these calls. When we received what appeared to be a phantom call, I would respond normally and search for a patient, confirm with police that the location was empty, research the deceased person's background and death circumstances, interview family members or friends if possible, document everything in my growing file. It was during these interviews that I started to understand why these calls were happening. Jennifer Morrison's parents told me that their daughter had always been dedicated to helping others as a nurse. Even as a child, she was the one who would take care of injured animals or comfort other kids when they got hurt, her mother said. She became a nurse because she couldn't stand to see people suffering. Robert Kim's daughter explained that her father had been a retired firefighter who continued to volunteer with community emergency response programs until his health declined. Dad always said that helping people was the most important thing you could do with your life. He couldn't retire from that, even when he officially retired from the fire department. David Park's brother told me that David had struggled with depression for years before his suicide, but that he'd always been the first person to help others in crisis. He volunteered at the suicide prevention hotline for 3 years. He understood what it felt like to be hopeless, so he was really good at talking people through their darkest moments. A pattern emerged. The people calling 911 from beyond death had all been individuals who dedicated their lives to helping others. They were nurses, firefighters, volunteers, social workers, people whose identities were built around providing aid and comfort to those in need. I shared this theory with Maria during one of our shifts in late October. So you think they're calling because they can't stop trying to help people, even after they're dead? That's what it looks like. These were all people whose life's purpose was helping others in emergencies. Maybe death doesn't stop that instinct. But why now? Why did these calls start 3 months ago? That was the question I couldn't answer. What had changed in September that triggered this phenomenon? The answer came from an unexpected source. On November 2nd, we received a call that was different from the others. Medic 47, respond to 3456 SE Division Street for an unknown medical emergency. Caller states she needs to speak with Alex Chen specifically. I grabbed the radio. Dispatch, can you repeat that? Did the caller ask for me by name? Affirmative, Medic 47. Caller identified herself as Dr. Patricia Hoffman and said she needs to speak with paramedic Alex Chen about the 911 calls. My blood ran cold. Dr. Patricia Hoffman had been the attending physician in the ER the night I brought in my first patient who didn't survive, a motorcycle accident victim named Kevin Martinez. Dr. Hoffman had worked frantically to save Kevin's life, but his injuries were too severe. She'd been the one to call time of death. Dr. Hoffman had died 2 months ago from complications following cancer surgery. Maria and I responded to the address, which turned out to be the hospital where Dr. Hoffman had worked. We found the night security guard in the lobby, who told us he hadn't seen anyone matching Dr. Hoffman's description, but as we walked through the empty corridors toward the ER, I heard a familiar voice calling my name, Alex Chen. I turned around and saw Dr. Hoffman standing at the far end of the hallway. She looked exactly as I remembered her. White coat, stethoscope around her neck, the same kind but tired expression she'd always worn during our interactions. Maria couldn't see her. Alex, who are you looking at? Dr. Hoffman is right there, I said, pointing down the hallway. Maria looked where I was pointing and shook her head. There's nobody there. Dr. Hoffman walked toward us, her footsteps making no sound on the tile floor. As she got closer, I could see that she was translucent, like looking at someone through frosted glass. Hello, Alex, she said when she reached us. I'm sorry to frighten you, but I need to explain what's been happening. The 911 calls, I said. You know why they're happening? Yes, it started because of you, because of me. Dr. Hoffman nodded. 3 months ago, you were working the night Kevin Martinez died in the motorcycle accident. Do you remember what you said to me that night? I thought back to that terrible shift in September. Kevin had been a young man, maybe 25 years old, who'd been hit by a drunk driver while riding his motorcycle home from work. His injuries were catastrophic, and despite everyone's best efforts, he died in the trauma bay. After Dr. Hoffman called time of death, I'd been overwhelmed by the senselessness of it all. Kevin was the same age as my younger brother, and his death had hit me particularly hard. I said I wished we could save everyone, I remembered. I said I wished there was a way to help people even after it was too late. That's right. And at that moment, something changed. Your wish created a connection between the world of the living and the world of the dead, a bridge that allows those of us who dedicated our lives to helping others to continue that work. I don't understand. How could my words create something like that? Dr. Hoffman smiled sadly. You work in a place where life and death intersect constantly. The hospital, the ambulance, the scenes of accidents and emergencies. These are thin places where the boundary between worlds is fragile. Your genuine desire to help, combined with the emotional intensity of that moment, created a crack in that boundary. So it's my fault that you're all trapped. We're not trapped, Alex. We're choosing to stay. When we died, we were given the opportunity to move on to whatever comes next. But we were also offered the chance to continue helping people, to answer their calls for help even when it's too late for them to be saved. But the 911 calls don't help anyone. We respond and find empty locations. The calls aren't about the response. They're about the connection. When someone dies alone and afraid, crying out for help that never comes, we can answer. We can let them know they're not alone in their final moments. We can provide comfort even when we can't provide rescue. I was struggling to process what Dr. Hoffman was telling me. So Jennifer Morrison, Robert Kim, all the others, they're helping people who are dying. Jennifer answers calls from people dying in car accidents. Robert responds to heart attack victims. David talks to people who are contemplating suicide. Each of us helps people facing the same circumstances we faced when we died. And the 911 calls we receive, those are echoes. When we answer a call from someone who's dying, the intensity of that connection sometimes creates a ripple that reaches the living world. You receive our calls because you're the one who opened the bridge between worlds. Dr. Hoffman's explanation was overwhelming, but it made sense of everything we'd experienced over the past 3 months. Is there a way to close the bridge? I asked. Do you want to close it? I thought about that question. The phantom calls had been disturbing and confusing, but if they were actually helping people who were dying alone, was that something I wanted to stop? The people you're helping, I said. Are you actually able to comfort them? Yes. Death is terrifying when you face it alone, but when someone reaches out to you in those final moments, when they tell you that you're not alone and that your life had meaning, it makes the transition easier. And you chose to stay and do this work rather than moving on to whatever comes after death. We all made that choice, yes. Just as you choose every day to work as a paramedic, knowing that you'll see suffering and death, we choose to stay because helping others is who we are, even beyond death. Dr. Hoffman began to fade as she spoke. I wanted you to understand what you'd created, Alex. The bridge you opened is allowing us to provide comfort to people in their darkest moments. The 911 calls you receive are a small price to pay for that service. Will the calls continue? Probably. As long as people die alone and afraid, we'll be there to answer their calls, and as long as we're answering their calls, you'll occasionally receive echoes of our work. Is there anything I should do differently? Just understand that every phantom call you receive represents someone who didn't die alone, someone who had their call answered by people who understand their fear and can offer comfort. Dr. Hoffman disappeared, leaving me standing in the empty hospital corridor with Maria, who had witnessed my side of the conversation without being able to see or hear Dr. Hoffman. Are you okay? Maria asked. You look like you've seen a ghost. I have, I said, and I think I understand now what's been happening. I explained Dr. Hoffman's visit and what she'd told me about the phantom calls. Maria listened thoughtfully, considering the implications. So you're saying that when we get these 911 calls from dead people, it means they're actually helping other people who are dying. That's what Dr. Hoffman explained. The calls we receive are just echoes of the real calls they're answering. And this is happening because you wish there was a way to help people even after it was too late. Apparently, I created some kind of bridge between the living and the dead, and it's allowing people who dedicated their lives to helping others to continue that work after they die. Maria was quiet for a long moment. That's either the most beautiful thing I've ever heard or the most terrifying. Maybe both. Over the following weeks, my perspective on the phantom calls changed completely. Instead of being disturbed by them, I started to feel honored that I was witnessing evidence of this extraordinary service. Each call we received meant that someone, somewhere, was dying with the comfort of knowing they weren't alone. Jennifer Morrison was helping car accident victims in their final moments. Robert Kim was comforting heart attack patients. David Park was talking suicide victims through their transition to whatever comes next. The calls continued, but now I understood their purpose. I started documenting them differently, not as strange phenomena to be explained, but as evidence of continued service by dedicated healthcare workers and first responders. November 15th, call from Dr. Stephen Walsh, reporting a cardiac arrest at Oregon Health and Science University. Dr. Fudget L. Walsh had died of a heart attack at OHSU 3 years ago while working an overnight shift in the cardiac unit. November 18th, call from nurse Rebecca Thompson, reporting a drug overdose at a downtown homeless shelter. Rebecca had died in a car accident 18 months ago while driving to work at the Addiction Recovery Center, where she volunteered. November 22nd, call from firefighter Carlos Rodriguez, reporting a structure fire at a residential apartment building. Carlos had died in a house fire 2 years ago while searching for trapped residents. Each call represented someone who had chosen to continue serving others even after death, providing comfort and companionship to people facing their final moments. I shared my new understanding with Captain Rodriguez and the other overnight crews. Some were skeptical, others were fascinated, but everyone agreed that if the phantom calls were actually helping dying people, we should continue to respond to them professionally and document them carefully. The 911 dispatch center developed a protocol for handling these calls. When a phantom call was identified, they would still send units to investigate, but they would also make a note in the system that the call might be connected to end-of-life comfort services being provided by deceased emergency workers. Margaret Wong told me that similar protocols were being developed in Seattle, Vancouver, and other cities that had experienced phantom calls. It's unprecedented, she said during one of our follow-up meetings. But if these calls are actually helping people who are dying, then we need to respect that and support it however we can. On December 1st, exactly 3 months after Dr. Hoffman's visit, I received another unusual call. Medic 47, respond to 2847 S.E. Morrison Street for a medical emergency. Caller identified herself as Jennifer Morrison and requests to speak with Alex Chen. It was the same address where we'd received our first phantom call, Jennifer Morrison's childhood home. Maria and I responded, and this time I was able to see Jennifer waiting for us on the front porch. She looked young and vibrant, wearing scrubs and a hospital ID badge. Like Dr. Hoffman, she was translucent, but clearly visible to me. "Hello, Alex," she said as we approached. "I wanted to thank you." "Thank me for what?" "For opening the bridge that allows us to continue helping people. I've been able to comfort 43 car accident victims since September. People who would have died alone and terrified instead had someone holding their hand and telling them they were going to be okay. Were you able to save any of them?" Jennifer shook her head. "That's not what we do. We can't change the outcome. People who are meant to die still die. But we can make sure they don't face death alone. We can provide comfort, reassurance, and peace in their final moments. And that's enough. That's worth staying behind for. For me, yes, helping people was always the most important thing in my life. Death doesn't change that." Jennifer began to fade as she spoke. "The other reason I wanted to talk to you is to let you know that we've been joined by others. Emergency workers who die in your area now have the option to join us in this work. The bridge you opened is permanent, so this will continue indefinitely. As long as people need comfort in their final moments, there will be those of us willing to provide it. And as long as we're doing this work, you'll continue to receive occasional echoes of our calls. I'm honored to be part of this, even in a small way. You're part of it in the most important way possible. None of this could happen without the bridge you created. Thank you for caring enough about helping people to make this possible." Jennifer disappeared, leaving me with a profound sense of purpose and connection to something larger than myself. The phantom calls continued throughout the winter and into the spring. I documented each one, building a comprehensive record of the emergency workers who had chosen to continue their service after death. Some patterns emerged. Nurses tended to focus on medical emergencies, firefighters responded to fire and accident scenes, police officers helped crime victims, and social workers assisted with mental health crises and domestic violence situations. Each group brought their expertise and compassion to their post-death service, providing exactly the kind of help they'd been trained to give during their living careers. In March, I was contacted by researchers from Portland State University who had heard about the phantom call phenomenon. Dr. Sarah Martinez, a professor of paranormal psychology, wanted to study what was happening and document it for academic purposes. This represents the first scientifically verifiable case of ongoing communication between deceased individuals and living emergency response systems, she explained during our initial meeting. If we can document this properly, it could revolutionize our understanding of consciousness, death, and the possibility of continued existence after physical death. I agreed to work with Dr. Martinez and her research team. We developed protocols for documenting phantom calls, recording audio when possible, and interviewing family members of the deceased emergency workers. The study took 6 months to complete, but the results were remarkable. Dr. Martinez's team was able to verify that 100% of the phantom calls came from individuals who had been emergency workers, healthcare providers, or volunteers in helping professions during their lives. They also discovered that the phantom calls were having measurable effects on emergency response times and resource allocation. Because the calls were being logged in the 911 system, they were creating additional data points that helped dispatchers identify patterns in emergency incidents and deploy resources more effectively. In a strange way, Dr. Martinez told me, these phantom calls are actually improving emergency services for living people. The data they generate is helping us understand incident patterns and response needs better than we ever have before. The study was published in the Journal of Consciousness Studies and attracted international attention. I received calls from emergency workers around the world who reported similar phenomena in their areas. It turned out that phantom calls from deceased emergency workers were happening in dozens of cities across North America, Europe, and Australia. In each case, they followed the same pattern: calls around 3 a.m. from people who had died in emergency situations, offering help to others facing similar circumstances. The bridge I had inadvertently opened in Portland was apparently just one of many that had formed around the world, created by emergency workers who wished they could continue helping people even after death. A year after the first phantom call, I was promoted to training supervisor for overnight paramedic crews. Part of my new responsibilities included briefing new employees about the phantom call phenomenon and helping them understand the purpose these calls served. You may receive 911 calls from people who died in your coverage area. I would tell new paramedics during orientation, don't be frightened. These calls are evidence that dedicated emergency workers are continuing to help people even after death. Respond professionally, document everything, and understand that you're witnessing something extraordinary. Most new employees were skeptical at first, but after experiencing their first phantom call, they usually came to appreciate the profound nature of what was happening. Maria retired in April after 21 years of service. On her last night working with me, we received a phantom call from Dr. Hoffman, who thanked Maria for her years of service and welcomed her to join the post-death emergency response team whenever she was ready. Not quite yet, Maria said to the empty air where I could see Dr. Hoffman standing. I've got a few more years of fishing and grandchildren ahead of me. My new partner is Tom Rodriguez, a recent paramedic school graduate who brings enthusiasm and fresh perspective to the job. When he experienced his first phantom call last month, he handled it better than most veterans would have. So we're basically getting backup from the ultimate emergency response team, he said after I explained what was happening. Dead paramedics, nurses, firefighters, and doctors who are still taking calls. That's actually pretty comforting. Tom was right. Knowing that there's an entire network of deceased emergency workers providing comfort to people in their final moments does make this job easier. We can't save everyone, but we can take comfort in knowing that the people we can't save won't die alone. The phantom calls have become a routine part of overnight emergency services in Portland. New dispatchers are trained to recognize and handle them. Police officers know to expect empty scenes when responding to assist on phantom calls. Hospital staff understand that these calls represent end-of-life comfort services being provided by their deceased colleagues. What started as a disturbing anomaly has become an accepted part of our emergency response system. We've learned to honor and support the continued service of emergency workers who have chosen to stay behind and help others even after death. Last week, I received a phantom call that was particularly meaningful to me. The caller identified himself as Kevin Martinez, the motorcycle accident victim, whose death had triggered my wish for a way to help people even after it was too late. Alex, Kevin said when I arrived at the scene of his original accident, I wanted you to know that I've been helping other motorcycle accident victims since I died, 27 people so far. I hold their hands and tell them about the amazing emergency crews who tried to save me and how much it meant to know that people cared. Are you at peace with what happened to you? I am now. Dying was terrifying, but Dr. Hoffman was there with me at the end. She explained that I could move on, or I could stay and help others who would face the same situation. Helping others makes my death meaningful. Thank you, I said, for choosing to stay and help. Thank you for caring enough to make it possible. Kevin faded away, leaving me standing at the intersection where his life had ended, but his service had begun. As I write this, it's been 15 months since the first phantom call. I've documented over 200 calls from 47 different deceased emergency workers. Each call represents multiple people who were comforted in their final moments by professionals who understood their fear and could offer genuine compassion. The bridge between the living and the dead remains open, and I've come to understand that it serves a purpose far greater than I ever imagined when I made that desperate wish in the trauma bay. Working as a paramedic means accepting that you can't save everyone, but knowing that the people we lose aren't truly alone in their final moments, that they have dedicated professionals helping them transition with dignity and comfort, makes the losses bearable. Every phantom call reminds me that death isn't the end of service for those who dedicate their lives to helping others. It's just a transition to a different kind of emergency response, one that provides the most fundamental form of medical care, human compassion in the face of death. I've learned that some bridges, once built, shouldn't be closed. The connection between the living and the dead that formed in that hospital trauma bay has created something beautiful, an eternal emergency response system staffed by people who loved helping others so much that they couldn't stop, even after death. Tonight, I'll clock in for another shift, knowing that if we receive a phantom call, it means someone somewhere is dying with the comfort of professional medical personnel at their side. In a job where we see suffering and loss every day, that knowledge makes all the difference. The calls from the dead aren't haunting us, they're blessing us with the knowledge that no one has to face death alone, and that dedication to helping others truly is eternal. Sometimes the most important 911 calls are the ones that can't be answered by the living, and sometimes the most meaningful emergency response happens in the space between life and death, provided by heroes who refuse to let their service end just because their hearts stop beating. As long as people die afraid and alone, there will be phantom calls, and as long as there are phantom calls, there will be proof that love, compassion, and the desire to help others transcend even death itself. My radio crackles to life. Medic 47, respond to. Another call, another chance to help someone in their moment of greatest need. Whether the caller is living or dead, the response is the same. We answer, we care, and we serve. That's what being a paramedic really means. And apparently, it's a commitment that doesn't end with death. I grab my radio and respond. Medic 47 en route. The work continues, in this world and the next.